Ark from North Jersey, what's on your mind?
Where in North Jersey?
Hudson County.
Ah, gotcha. All right. You know, I'm Essex.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm watching you guys right now from the Palisades.
Very nice.
So I guess I won't do a leading question. I'll just say I think you guys are wrong on Ukraine.
Okay.
I don't think you guys are wrong on the goals. But simply the reality is the U.S. left has no way to aid the Ukrainians in a meaningful way. Any aid that is sent to Ukraine is going to go through the NatSec blob and the CIA. And so the reality is just that nothing good is going to come of it.
My understanding is that some of the aid is actually not, and that not all of the aid is military. That some of it is providing, some civil support. I'm happy to stipulate that the vast majority of it is in the form of military aid, but some of it is civil support. But okay, let's stipulate that.
Yeah, well, okay, nothing good is going to come with military aid. It's just. The reality is that it's going to go through the normal NatSec filters, and those guys are running up the score right now. They're looking at it and they say we can just convert dollars into dead Russians, and it so happens you convert those dollars into Ukrainian soldiers, who you convert into dead Ukrainian soldiers, who then you convert into dead Russians. But they don't care about that at all. Is
your contention that if we were to stop aid, there would be no dead Ukrainian soldiers?
No, but it's simply just that the money, the weapons we're sending can never be a net positive. It's just one way or another.
Well, okay. I mean, I understand what you're saying. Now, you're not pro-Soviet intervention, correct?
Soviet intervention?
Invasion.
Soviets are intervening. I mean, pro-Russian, right? Sorry.
No, not pro-Russian. I think the Ukrainians, are in the right so far as they're defending themselves.
But your argument is just that, our money is not going to help them. Now, what?
Yeah, I mean, you could make the same argument for Tigray or Armenia right now.
Well,
we're not.
I don't know if you could make the same argument about Armenia. I'm not as familiar with Tigray, but my understanding in Armenia is that war is over. To the extent that there was, to the extent that at least I can't remember the name of the place. What's the name of the where everybody is?
Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not 2/3 or more of those people have already evacuated. I believe, and it's quite clear. I mean, I think you can go back and look at the history. Had the Russians taken over Ukraine in that first week or two, I don't think we would have seen any of this. It's not inconceivable to me that you would, maybe get some CIA op that would fund the underground, rebellion, but certainly not in this magnitude. But ending our support for Ukraine's military, what do you think happens after that?
I think that it doesn't. It ultimately doesn't matter from my perspective. There's outcomes I would prefer, but sort of the reality is that none of the outcomes from here are good. The invasion happened. I would have preferred if it didn't. But
okay, I get you.
Happened.
I get you. All right, let me ask you this then. I mean, I understand. I mean, I don't think that's. I mean, that was basically my position about Syria. Why we shouldn't, get involved at all in Syria. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think there are circumstances where the U.S. should support a country or an entity that is being invaded by another country?
Under the current configuration of our international configuration, like our ability to influence other nations and send them things? No, not really.
There's no circumstance. There's no circumstance.
There's just no way that our current institutions can do it in a way that's going to be beneficial. Like even in like
let me ask you this.
Haiti, even in Haiti, when we're sending 100% economic food aid, we still can't do it in a way that does anything other than harm these countries.
Okay. Do you think it is a benefit or a liability to Ukraine if it is the case that since like week 3, when the Russians had invaded Ukraine, since like let's I mean, we can pick a date,
once
but
Kiev was like no longer under threat.
no, from when Kiev was under threat. Let's count it from there, because Kiev, like, you know, certainly if there had been no aid from the U.S., Kiev would have fallen, right? So let's start from there.
I'm not sure if that's. I mean, I guess there was aid long. You know, we're talking about there was aid since 2014.
Right. Okay, fair enough. But had there not been supplemental aid, Kiev, I think, would have fallen. I don't. I mean, maybe you dispute that. I don't
understand how you could.
I couldn't say.
But okay, you can't say. But let's just. I mean, whatever you want to place it. There was, you had Russian military. You had lines that were drawn 3 weeks out from their invasion, 4 weeks out from their invasion. From that time, the U.S., and to the extent that there's some European military aid, has. The Ukrainians have recaptured 50% of what had been occupied by Russian forces. Is that, how do you assess that? Like, is that helping or not helping?
I don't know that we can make that determination.
Who makes that determination?
You know, historians will in 30
well,
years.
But I mean, is there? Okay, I mean, yes, we can't.
Like,
we can't know.
The reality is like that. You know, you can say like, okay,
let me ask you this. Let me just say this.
Steamroll.
Let me just say this.
Okay.
You can't. You can't defer to history on that question, but not defer to it on the assertion that we can't help. In other words, you gotta have some consistency here. If you're making an assessment that we're not helping now, I could say to you, well, we can answer that question in 30 years. But because right now it's a policy choice, right? It's a policy choice that has to happen now. So
we do have examples of us not helping. Afghanistan, Korea, Haiti,
Libya, which I was in support of, at least the limited UN, what the UN had voted for, without a doubt. I think there are some who would argue that Yugoslavia, what was actually helpful. I mean, we need more history on that. But in terms of making this determination right now, like, what would you do to assess whether the U.S. military aid has allowed the Ukrainians to take back 50% of what was occupied by the Russians, whatever it was, a year and a half ago? How would you assess that? Or, I mean, do you just say, I don't need to assess that, we just shouldn't do it in any circumstance?
So I think it's ultimately, we just don't know. We don't know what, we can't prove counterfactuals. We can't say for sure. And so my default is to say we shouldn't do it because ultimately it's never worked. I just can't think of an example when it worked out well.
Well, I mean, one example.
World War II.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, I think
World War II worked out.
The military, I think the military industrial complex and the whole apparatus is not necessarily less trustworthy than it was back then. And I would say like that intervention is one I think you could overall support. But I think your general point about this apparatus being not one that's trustworthy, or one you can expect to, like, say, like my concern going forward with the Ukraine important thing is that both sides, Russia and the United States, and the different military apparatuses behind those, settle into this as, oh, this is a sort of a field where we can try out new technologies for war and stuff like that. Like, I think that is a concern when you have to rely on the United States military as like to underwrite your defense. I think that is right, but I also think like it's not so simple as that. And I think like the people that would say,
well, let me rephrase this. What is, if you're in charge of making this policy decision, what is your metrics in terms of like what outcomes are you trying to achieve? Less death?
I guess I would look at quality of life for Ukrainians in 2035, something like that.
Okay. Now, how do you assess?
The reality is,
okay. I get you.
Ukrainian children blown up by mines.
I get you. But how are you assessing? How are you in a position to assess that? Like, I mean, wouldn't you just say like, this is a Ukrainian decision if that's the case?
Yes.
Right?
Well, it's in the same way that what's happening in Artsakh right now is a Armenian decision. Like, it's not
right, and they decided
is always constrained by their the realities on the ground. It's not simply a decision.
You're trying to guess what's going to be the best outcome for the Ukrainians in 2035, and that to me seems to be just as like it
is arbitrary.
It's just as arbitrary as like you saying what's the value of taking back 50% of the country. I can tell you what a Ukrainian would say right now. That 50% less of invaders in their country is a positive.
I just think you have to respect Ukrainian sovereignty and their assessment of what they feel is best for them. I mean, But
can we trust, I guess to that point, like, can we trust our military to definitely be in complete agreement with what Ukrainians on the ground think? I don't know that we definitely can.
We
totally
can't.
agree that we can't.
We can't, and it's an ever-changing situation, but I don't necessarily know what you're trying to say and what evidentiary claims that you've made that United States aid is not helping Ukraine right now, because you've said that and you've said that is your fear, but there hasn't been anything that you've pointed to that has shown that our aid has been in any way detrimental in that way.
Well, I mean, there's going to be, every president elected after Zelensky is going to be a member of Azov. There's going to be stuff like that.
Whoa.
Really?
Really? That's in the future. Okay, I think that claim is I think that claim is very, very extreme. But I want you.
That might be more.
But I want you to
ask
if you could just answer what are the evidentiary claims now that shows from based on what you've read, because you seem to be into this topic, that show that United States aid is not helping Ukraine in their defense right now.
I can't prove it counterfactual.
No, it's not counterfactual. It's right now.
But it's assertion that you've made. You're just making an assertion. You're making an assertion based upon past performance. And I'm just asking you, like I'm not even taking a position on the aid. I'm just trying to explore, like, what is the basis of your saying that? And it seems to be that in the past, for the most part, U.S. aid in these things is a negative force. And I would agree with that. And I certainly would. I mean, that's what the history is. But yeah. I'm not clear.
My assessment is that the alternative of us not providing aid would ultimately have no worse outcomes than where we are right now.
But
how are you measuring those outcomes?
Well, then we get back to my sort of arbitrary.
Right. I mean, that's the problem here, is that it really is just sort of like, I mean, I think broadly speaking, I think
it's good to be wary of the military.
I think broadly speaking, as a default, your algorithm, if you will, is
your skepticism.
I would defer to that. But I think, like in this instance, I think the best case scenario that we're going to get is going to be some form of, in terms of like stability going forward, 2035 is going to be some type of negotiated peace. But I think, unfortunately, the only way we're going to get a negotiated peace at this point is till both parties find it in their interest to sue for peace. And if we stop our aid to Ukraine at this point, I don't see any less killing of Ukrainian soldiers until essentially they run out of every bullet that they have and they all get annihilated. And then Russia takes over the country, puts in a strongman, and then 2035, if we don't have ongoing sort of like guerrilla fighting going on during that period of time, by 2035, you're gonna have this we're gonna go through the exact same cycle again. And so if you're looking for long-term stability, the only way that's gonna come, it's in my opinion, is if both parties want to feel like they're not going to gain anything more by fighting. And I will say this with the one caveat is that if someone could show me evidence that the U.S. has, inhibited those negotiations, then I would change my mind. The only way that they've inhibited the negotiations is by funding Ukraine. But if they didn't fund Ukraine, there would be no negotiations. It would be, what are the terms of your surrender? And in fact, there may not even be an entity to surrender at the end of that. It would just be like, here's our prefect. We'll allow you to have elections in 2 years. I mean, that's what's going to happen if the Ukrainians run out of their ability to defend themselves.
And Biden is now mulling conditions for aid. That came out today or yesterday. So I just think, like some of the concerns that are inherent in your call here are being considered, not to the degree that you'd like, I understand, not to the degree that I would like. But that's, we're in a bad situation and there are no good kind of choices here. It's about harm reduction, right, in my opinion. And I still feel that you haven't really made a great case for why your method would be create more harm reduction than the method that's currently being employed. So that's my feeling here.
I don't want to I guess I won't. No, I've taken enough of your time. I think I've made my position.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've said what I want to say.
Appreciate the call.
Yeah. Thanks.
I mean, in general, I think the caller's instinct to feel that we can't help a situation should be the first instinct that we have.
Yeah, and
frankly, I think that's what our policy was.
Yeah.
If you go back to those early days, and even pre-invasion, the Biden administration is saying they're going to invade. They're going to invade. They're going to invade. There was no move to send military aid at that time. None. It didn't happen until the Russians failed to cleanly take over the country. And then at that point, you had Zelensky saying, send me ammunition. Mm-hmm. And the question becomes, do you completely turn away from a situation where the Ukrainians had a fighting chance? How do I know they had a fighting chance? I can tell you now they have pushed the Russians back and reclaimed 50% of the territory that the Russians had taken. And that figure could actually even include what was taken in 2014. And so there's efficacy in that regard if the idea of having a sovereign Ukraine is a value proposition to anybody, and not allowing Russia to simply decide they want to invade a country and allow them to do it. This is not to say that the United States doesn't do the same thing. I mean, I think the point is that we don't want anybody to do this.